You're listening to Marcus Gill Presents Antarctica Expert Interviews. Get the most out of your Antarctica adventure by learning practical how-to knowledge and listening to the fascinating stories shared by the world's leading experts on your Antarctica itinerary. And be sure to read the video description for more information on how to prepare for your own Antarctica cruise. Now, here's Marcus.
Hey, and welcome to another exciting episode of Antarctica Expert Interviews. This is a really good one. It's a very practical one. We're very lucky to have this guest. His name is Jackson Harren. He is the owner of Wintergreen Northern Wear, a company that not only supplies the state-of-the-art clothing that is perfect and specifically suited for Antarctica, but they're actually the innovators of it. The company was founded at a time where going on extreme expeditions was new, especially at a consumer level. And this company, their history is so rich, it's so amazing. So they're going to touch on the history of the company and how this incredible clothing was designed and innovated. And then Jackson's also going to give you practical steps and knowledge that you need to choose the proper clothing so that you stay comfortable and safe on your expedition to Antarctica. So enjoy this interview. My producer and host, Chris Templeton, does a great job with Jackson Harren, the owner of Wintergreen Northern Wear, the specialist in Antarctica clothing. Enjoy.
Now, here is your host, Chris Templeton.
I'm really pleased to be here with Jackson Harren, owner of Wintergreen Northern Wear. Jackson, thank you so much for taking the time to be on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You guys have quite an origin story at Wintergreen Northern Wear. Tell everybody a little bit about the background of how the business got going.
Sure, it is an interesting story. Really, it started with polar exploration in more modern times. Paul Shirky was with Will Seeger in the early 80s expedition to the North Pole. And his wife, Sue, helped him and the rest of the expedition really create clothing that was going to really protect them up at the North Pole and throughout those weeks. And that's kind of really how it got started. They couldn't find real adequate clothing on the market. And that's kind of how the anoraks began, with the flair of the Scandinavian trim and more of those modern materials, leveraging the nylon and the fleece type systems.
And as I understand it, Sue, from scratch and with some background in living in the Arctic region, had some background in how to put this together and create these pieces that I think it's hard to understate the conditions that these guys were in on this expedition. And being able to make the clothing for that, man, that's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, I think that really the only way to understand it is to experience it. And yeah, the Shirkies had spent some time in the north, the far north, with the Inuit people, and they kind of observed how they dressed and how they had those warmth, baggy layers that kind of preserve the heat inside of your clothing, and then over the top of all of that is a kind of a wind-proof shell anorak, and that was the inspiration, for Sue to kind of put her talents into the design and the sewing of their garments.
One of the things that you mentioned that fascinates me is you said that her original, or that the Inuit had baggy clothing. You would think that kind of the way to do it is to have tight-fitting clothing, and that's really not the case, is it?
Right, it's not the case. Yeah, it's probably one of the misconceptions that and one of the mistakes people make when they're trying to dress warm. Really, what's important is for you to get the moisture, created away from your skin, and you can do that with some, more synthetic materials or wool materials, and you want to have some room for your clothing to kind of trap that heat and store that heat. And then you can have multiple layers of warmth, kind of depending on your conditions. And then it's super important to have a protection layer that's not only wind resistant, windproof, water resistant, but also breathable, right? So that that moisture can kind of continue to be exhumed from your body. And that's really the system that kept the expedition that we were talking about, safe, and it's been tried and true for centuries, really.
Talk a little bit about the clothing system that was designed with Wintergreen Northern Wear.
Sure. Well, Wintergreen has what we feel is one of the top, if not the top, layering system for active winter, activity, outdoor expeditions or just everyday living. So it really starts with a base layer. There's a 3-layer system. It starts with a base layer where we have some options that we bring to people that are whether it's merino based or a synthetic nylon based that's kind of up against your skin. That helps with that wicking aspect of controlling your the moisture next to your body. And then the middle layer is that fleece warm layer. And that's kind of our bread and butter product line there, where we have our fleece expedition anorak in a full zip or a pullover partial zip option. We've got a variety of colors, and it all has our signature trim on some of the seams. And it's kind of one of those distinctive aspects of our clothing that we kind of feel makes it kind of more fashionable, more timeless. And then from there we have the shell layer, which is your wind layer, and that's very similar in like style to the fleece, but it's made to be on the outer almost a layer of your system, and that's a very light layer. It dries very easily. It helps protect from that wind and kind of the cooling effect of the harsh conditions.
And at the same time, somehow is able to let that moisture escape. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the shell anorak, the outer layer is designed to be breathable, but protecting. So it doesn't store in the moisture. It dries quickly. You can flip inside out to dry faster. There's an actual inner layer to that shell that's not attached to prevent from ice buildup and or build up close to the body.
I imagine that one of the things that of this layer system, that base layer that keeps the moisture away from your skin, wicks it away, is probably almost as important as the insulating layer and the wind layer. Is that right?
Very much so. Yeah, I don't mean to put any more emphasis on any of the three, because whenever I'm going to spend some that type of time outside, I make sure I've thought through all 3 layers equally as important. People that spend a lot of time doing this sort of thing, they don't bring one article of clothing that's made of cotton, that's going to trap the moisture and not kind of help get it away from you, because that's your body's creating sweat, and it's creating moisture to help when it's exerting itself or it's getting hot. And later on, you need that moisture to be away from you. So the whole system continues to move that moisture away while it's trapping the heat.
I spent my youth sailing on the San Francisco Bay, and the old saying was, the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer on the bay. And I know it doesn't get nearly as cold as what you can do with or handle with your clothing. But the other thing that is just so important is layering, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, layering is absolutely important. What's nice about it too is you've got multiple ways to wear the clothing. If you don't need the wind layer, then don't wear it, right? If you don't need as many warmth layers, then you can remove them and kind of control your body heat that way. So that's certainly part of how you execute your your clothing system when you're out there in the harsh conditions, and even in obviously in the more temperate climates where you don't need the whole system intact.
The other thing that we haven't talked about is our protecting from the waist down with pants, and is that a layered system that you bring to the table as well, or what's different about getting fit for pants versus an anorak?
I think it's similar. Yeah, I was really referring to the entire body, lower body and upper body,
Mm-hmm.
as well as your head. Really, in some cases, you want to have a couple different things, ways to protect your head as well, a hat and a hood and that sort of thing. But yeah, with your legs, it's the same thing. I wear a merino blend, long underwear, and then same thing with a fleece, sometimes even a lighter, wool type warmth pants, and then over the top of that is our signature Supplex material that's going to protect from the wind and also some of the moisture kneeling down. And sometimes we'll put in some knee pads into the fabric as well to kind of just help when you're outside and those sort of expeditions that we're talking about to the North Pole or something like that, or you're messing with the dogs all the time, or you're winter camping and you're setting up camp, or you're chopping wood. A lot of times you're going down on your knees and stuff. So that's another layer of protection that we recommend. Sometimes we do, but yeah, same concept with the lower body as the upper.
I think about a winter parka or a ski jacket, and I think, man, what you guys are getting people ready for is a whole different world, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the warm parkas that people think of, they're a lot of times made of down, or at least the higher quality ones, more expensive ones. But our system doesn't use down. It insulates even when it's wet, and that's one of the downfalls of down. It's got an airspace, it's warmth where down can compress when it's wet. So that's one maybe differentiator with some of the other like more common parkas that you see versus a system that we've been talking about.
And I think of people talking about how great down is, and clearly not wet. Talk about the insulation that you guys use in regards to that. Is it always just the fleece protection in the middle layer?
Well, yeah, with regards to the actual middle layer that we've been speaking of, the warmth layer, we really hang our hat on a heavy fleece. We partner with a couple of suppliers that they make the heaviest fleece really that's on the market, especially for us, and it's tightly woven as well. So it's got some wind resistant capability as well. But it's a heavy fleece. It's over 400 weight, and that really does a great job with just just providing a warm jacket, but then also a warm layer when you're going the full system. But Wintergreen provides, we make we make a variety of products. If you kind of explore our website, and you kind of see that we do some merino shirts that can be dual purpose. They can be one of those layers. They can be something that you wear uptown or to a business meeting. We make some other options with a wool, Melton wool. Like we have a more of a stylish overcoat for both men and for women. Not necessarily specific for Arctic and Antarctic polar exploration, but for keeping just good active wear in the winter climates. So yeah, we have a few different options and of both maybe style and taste for those different layers and for just wearing out and about.
When you think about people that are getting ready to go on an Arctic adventure, what are the differences in how they measure themselves for their clothing? What do you want people to understand about what's different in regards to how I might wear a ski jacket in, from the car to the store or something. What's different about measuring for an Arctic expedition?
It's a great question. I think sizing, if I had a magic wand to understand clothing sizing, it would really help me in this industry. But in general, if you're going to be preparing yourself to spend time in a harsh climate, what you don't want to get overly to stay too obsessed with looking good or having your clothing snug fitting and that sort of thing, and like you would in an urban environment. And so what you want to do is you just want to make sure that your clothing is comfortable, that you have good use of your arms, and you're not getting too bunched up, and you're going to be a little bit more of a boxy fit. So the sizing of our anorak system, for example, it's a little bit more loose sized, so that it allows for those layers. So they actually our fleece nests into our outer layer by design, so that they work together and not restrict your movement or any stop any of that moisture control or wind control. So yeah, you kind of have to give up a little bit of the more fitted look, perhaps, if you're going to be spending time in the
I don't
Arctic.
get to look as good as I do on the slopes. Is that the deal, Jackson?
Maybe not, but we do have some garments for that.
Perfect. Talk a little bit about the nesting of the middle layer, the warmth layer, and the jacket. I imagine that there are different ways that you cut this so that it doesn't kind of creep up and become constricting. Is that correct?
Indeed, yeah. You mentioned Sue Shirky in the beginning, and I think it's always been her vision to design these products, this clothing, with the system in mind. So when she first set out to design that warmth layer, it was alongside the outer layer, and to make sure that, as the outline of the clothing and the cut and the seams, they're intentionally nested with each other and designed to accommodate each other over the top of each other. So yeah, that's certainly present. If you can feel it when you wear it, that it seems to be a natural layering system, so you can take one off, put one on, and you just kind of keep rolling without ever feeling like you're restricted or you're bound together.
That's got to be hugely important. And the word you used earlier is in a harsh climate. It's got to be so important to have that range of movement, isn't it?
Yes. Yep. You've got to be at your best. You've got to be able to do what you need to do. And, there's, you can withstand some pretty terrible weather if you've got great clothing,
And what about pants? Is it the same thing? Are we looking at kind of a looser fit, maybe with a cuff at the bottom? How does that work?
A little bit looser fit. Yeah. You want to be able to accommodate some warmth layer, in your legs. Like to have a nice, firm cuff on the bottom. That's kind of part of that snow management, perhaps, if you're going to be spending time in really snowy conditions. You want to have some boots that protect you from that, and then have, our shell pants could go over the top of a boot, and then they would kind of lock in that snow protection and wind from coming up the legs.
And do you recommend that people take different thicknesses of that warmth layer on an expedition? In other words, am I always going to wear the heaviest fleece, or do I want to have the ability to kind of manage those layers a little more?
No, I think you want to bring a few layers. I find myself, I like to have a merino thinner layer, because that's kind of nice to if you're in the tent, or maybe it's a nicer day and you don't need to have all of the layers. I like to have another kind of like a mid-weight fleece. Some people would have a wool layer, especially if you're going to be spending a lot of time stationary. Wool is kind of nice to have as just a little bit heavier when you're a little bit less active as well. But then, yeah, have that heavy fleece and have that supplex nylon shell. And then you can really control, depending on the conditions, how you want your body to be protected.
Talk a little bit about the supplex nylon that you mentioned. What's important about that? I think about how many technologies have come and gone over the years to kind of provide that protection, the wind, the water, and this is a newer one, I think, compared to, say, something like Gore-Tex.
Sure. So our shell anoraks and several of our garments are made with the supplex nylon. It's a very lightweight material. It's very strong. It's designed to be breathable. Provides a lot of protection. It doesn't, like I said kind of earlier, it doesn't store in the moisture. It's very quick to dry. So it's got a lot of attributes. One of my favorite attributes actually is how quiet it is, even in cold conditions. So if you find yourself out maybe 10 below or colder, a lot of times your kind of wind protection type of a layer gets really loud, and cotton can kind of do that too. But this material's got, it stays quiet. So that's kind of another kind of bonus for it.
When you think about somebody who's thinking about going into these harsh types of environments, what are some of the other things that you think people should be thinking about?
Well, you've got to keep your hands and your feet warm. Whenever I take my kids out or people out that have never been really spending a lot of times in the cold weather, first thing I look at is what's on their feet and what's on their hands. So I don't think you could overlook that. A boot that is it's got a liner in it. A lot of times we recommend, because especially if you're going overnight, you can take that liner out and dry it. It's really important to keep your feet dry. It's nice to have the same thing, a layer on your feet where you've got maybe a synthetic type material sock, a nice heavy wool sock over that inside your boot, and your boots can't be too tight or your feet are going to get cold. You've got to be able to move around a little bit. You got to wiggle your toes. Same thing on your hands. Like to have a kind of a system on your hands as well. If you could get like a nice wool mitten and then have like a nice big shell type nylon or leather over mitt. That's a nice way to go as well. Usually gives you can kind of move your fingers around that way. So for the glove system, you can have some, a liner that's close to your skin, and that way sometimes you can pull out of your mitten and you still have some protection if you need to do something with a little more dexterity, and then go back into your glove or your mitten where your fingers can move around a little bit. You can kind of warm up your fingers that way in extreme cold. And that outer shell can be a nylon shell, or it could be a leather. We do a lot of leather as well.
One of the things that we haven't talked about, or just briefly, is protecting our head. And one of the things in researching this that surprised me was, again, this idea of, oh man, we got to make sure we've got room for whatever is on your head to start with before you pull a hood over. Talk about the importance of that.
Yes, your head, you lose a lot of heat through your head. I forget the statistic, but a lot of people know that one. But I always have a baklava, and that way I could pull it up over my face, or at least it helps protect wind getting down or heat from coming out of my upper body system. So that's a nice piece to have. I prefer merino wool myself. A lot of times we'll have similar type of a full head type covering underneath a heavier hat. I mean, and that's really a lot of people's own preference, whether you like the big bomber hat that kind of protects you, it has some fur,
Right.
or your face and your chin is maybe more protected by a thinner layer than a heavy fleece hat or wool hat, and then the hood, and I'm kind of partial to having the coyote fur type of a ruff on the hood, because it is amazing how much protection your face gets when you create that tunnel when you're in really harsh conditions. You watch the dog mushers, for example, they're coming through in really cold conditions, and they got those hoods up, and they're in their tunnels, and they can see, and they can keep their face forward into the wind, even well with doing that.
And that fur collar around the edge of the hood really makes a huge difference, huh?
Makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Huh. Very
Yep.
interesting.
It takes some of those natural qualities of that animal fur, and it kind of applies it to your face area where it's kind of captures the cold wind, and it just kind of creates an effect where your face is a lot more protected than without it.
One of the things that I think really gives Wintergreen Northern Wear an edge is where you're located in Ely, Minnesota. Is that right?
Yeah, it's pronounced Ely, Minnesota.
Ely,
Yes.
Minnesota.
Yeah, a lot of
And
people
you,
are familiar with the Boundary Waters area of Minnesota. It's one of the things that puts Minnesota on the map. Yeah, so it's really in the middle of nowhere in northeast Minnesota, where there's a lot of access to lakes and forests and trails, and it's also one of the most popular places on earth for dog sledding these days. There's a lot of people that come to Ely to experience, maybe their once in a lifetime chance to ride on a dog sled. So Ely is located on the edge of the Boundary Waters, and that's been the birthplace and the present home of Wintergreen Northern Wear.
the one thing that we haven't talked about is made in Ely, Minnesota.
Right.
Talk about why that's important to you guys.
It's very important to us that our clothing is handmade in Minnesota. That's how we started. That's how we can control our quality, how we can really add, as much value as we can to our garments. We've started to expand a little bit the sewing pool of people to some surrounding communities in Minnesota. But we like to say that we are designed and cut and sewn, which are the three kind of key processes in clothing manufacturing, right here in Minnesota, and almost exclusively in Ely.
The other thing that I noticed on the website was that if you have something out of stock, it gets made custom for a customer. Can you talk about that part of the business? And is it something that a customer can call and say, hey, listen, I really want something that's made just for me?
Yes, again, we pride ourselves in being handmade right here in Minnesota, and part of some of the value that we can add is we have a personal touch with our customers, whether they come into the store, contact us online, or give us a call, and we can mix and match trims for them. We can find colors. We can do some alterations to really equip you with exactly what you want, and with that distinctive look and that customer service touch that is very important to our customers and very important to us.
One thing that I think we should also talk about is you're a family guy with 3 kids. Talk a little bit about how you make sure that your kids, when you're out in the middle of winter, aren't getting frostbitten or are well taken care of as they play.
No one has fun when the kids are cold. There's nothing that ends your day faster, right? So I learned that pretty quick. So much more thought goes into keeping my kids warm than myself. But they've all got pretty good equipment now where I can keep their hands warm and their feet warm. Got some tricks, maybe if when they are starting to get cold, getting them out of the wind, maybe getting their gloves and their boots off in another like warmer environment to kind of warm them up. We want to keep their faces warm. They'll spend a lot of time on the back of a toboggan or snowmobile or out in the wind. So that wind protection is really important for the kids. They get cold really fast out in the wind.
Yeah.
It's basically the same equipment as for the adults. It's a little bit harder to find equipment for kids. And you hear that a lot. People come into the store, like, I'm trying to find, a good system for the kids. And we do have a kids section, Wintergreen does, because we know this. And the equipment, the clothing was designed throughout the lives of the Shirkies children as well. And so yeah, it's definitely part of our culture.
I am super impressed by Wintergreen Northern Wear and what you're doing, Jackson. I want to encourage everybody to go to wintergreennorthernwear.com. And also, you can reach Jackson and the store at 218-365-6602. Ely-Made, ELY-Made, 359-6233. And then also follow these guys on Facebook and Instagram at Wintergreen Northern Wear. Jackson, when you think about people that are wearing your clothing heading out on these kinds of expeditions, what's the one thing that you think is the most important thing for them to know?
I think they should know that there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. So if you've given it some thought, if you've learned from people that have spent a lot of time doing it, it should give you a lot of confidence in making sure you've got what you need with the layering system that we've talked about, with managing the wicking of the moisture and the warmth and the wind. And if you've thought through that and then you don't forget about your feet and your hands and your head, then you should be good to go. You should. There's no better way to learn than to get out there.
And I think kind of the wraparound for me is going back to the kids. Look, if you can get your kids happy, they're going to have a great time in those harsh environments, aren't they?
They are. They love it.
And it's the same for adults, isn't it?
It is. It's my favorite time of year, the winter. So.
With the right clothing.
With the right clothing, exactly.
Jackson Harren, you are the owner of Wintergreen Northern Wear up in Ely, Minnesota. You can be reached at 218-365-6602. Also be found on the web at wintergreennorthernwear.com. Great About Us section to find out all the history of this store that's been around for so long and what you guys make. I totally appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Had a good time.
Thank you for listening to Marcus Guild Presents Antarctica Expert Interviews. And be sure to read the video description for more information on how to prepare for your own Antarctica cruise.